Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is the Ukraine War news update. I've already done a kind of breaking news or a news update concerning the peace negotiations that have been taking place over the last few days, just the last 24-hour update on that one this morning. So please check that video out, super important. And we're going to look at the hits and losses concerning the war itself and what's been taking place over the front lines for the last 24 hours. But we're going to focus quite a lot on the attacks overnight. So Russia sent a huge number of missiles and drones into Ukraine. Ukraine did a fairly good job of intercepting them, and I think they had a better night of it, the Ukrainians, because they hit Crimea, Azov, Sea of Azov area, Taganrog in Rostov, and Tuapse in Novorossiysk on the Black Sea coastline, Russia's Black Sea coastline, and they have done, I think, some pretty significant damage to the Russians. And this is all, I think, an answer to the peace negotiations that are taking place. Both sides trying to make a very big statement. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. There's an A-60 or maybe even A-50 AWACS plane that's been hit, a landing ship that's been hit, all sorts going on. So that's to look forward to. In the meantime, please remember to like, subscribe, and share, obviously. That really helps out the channel. So if you haven't already done so, please do so. Thank you very much. Right, let's get into it. We are going to look at the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. And I've said for the last however many months, and they are linked in the description below. Someone pointed out yesterday, I've been looking for these caveats and they're not linked. They've kind of fallen off the links. So Benny Pie's looking into that. Hopefully they will be linked again. I don't know how that happened. But anyway, someone devised, was it a guy called Davin? I think devised these caveats to these numbers, and so I don't have to say them every day, which is like, yeah, guesstimation, we know this, we know that, but the Russians are no good at their figures and they're completely unrealistic. And the Ukrainians, we've been looking at these stats for 3 years plus, and all the evidence suggests that blah 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 blah. So those are all the caveats. But anyway, the numbers that we have here: 1,120 personnel loss, which is a good number for the Ukrainians. That's above the 1,000 threshold quite considerably. You got 2 tanks and 4 armored combat vehicles on the list there, so below average in those categories as per normal these days. Artillery systems, 18 on the list, which is fairly good, but down from the very high numbers we had yesterday. 112 vehicles and fuel tanks. Now, that's a significant increase. I think the higher this number, the more likely the Russians are attacking on the front line, and with a high number of Russian losses, together with a high number of vehicle and fuel losses down in this category, I think you have a suggestion that the Russians were very active on the front lines yesterday, and then 3 pieces of special equipment. Now, I don't know, people have often asked me, oh, by the way, 2 air defense systems in there as well. That's a highly significant number. People often ask me, well, all these radars get taken out in Crimea, for example, where do these end up? And I think they're likely to end up in special equipment rather than air defense systems, things like Nebo radars. So if you get 3 pieces of kit here, that could be like, 10 to 50 to $100 million piece of kit added into that, and we kind of forget about it. Oh yeah, 3 pieces of special equipment, but that could well be like a really expensive radar. Or it could be, I don't know, a D minor or something like that. So, there is a wide remit possibly for that category. And I guess there are things like radio systems, radar systems that are part of the larger, say, air defense battery for an S-400. That if just the radar system got taken out in a air defense battery, I think it would go in air defense systems. But if it was a standalone radar like a Nebo or something like that, array, it would probably go in special equipment. But that's just me guessing. Right, moving on. We hear in terms of personnel in Russia's Leningrad region, prisoners who signed contracts with the Defense Ministry escaped en route to the SMO zone. They reportedly killed the convoy driver, took his weapon, and fled. Wow. These are the Russian Knights, the supposed elite of Russia, as Putin called them. Well, I don't know whether you can really say that of these convicts who have been drafted almost certainly under immense pressure into the armed forces. They obviously didn't want to be going to the front lines to their certain deaths, and so they took things into their own hands and have killed the convoy driver, taken his weapon, and fled. I wonder what their hopes would be in terms of, where do you go? 6 fugitives on the run from authorities with a single gun between them. I don't know. There's a film in that probably. Right, going to the front lines here. We're going to actually go down to the Kherson and even Mykolaiv region. So I believe Kimburn Spit here exists in the Mykolaiv region. This, just as a point of interest, this Spit area, Kimburn Peninsula area, is one that I think is on the as far as the European peace document is concerned. This area, they say, needs to be returned to Ukraine to give free maritime access to the Bug River and the Dnipro River here up to Mykolaiv, the important port there, and Kherson. And if Russia maintain control of this, then life becomes very difficult. And also it's part of the Mykolaiv Oblast, which is over here. This is Kherson Oblast, but interestingly, this, probably because of how close it is to Kyiv and how involved it is with sort of maritime traffic here, that will be to do with the Mykolaiv Oblast. This is part of the Mykolaiv Oblast, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I understand. Anyway, it's not what this is about. Russian military bloggers are openly worried about the situation on the left bank of the Dnipro in Kherson. Left bank is, as the river flows, it flows in this direction. So the left-hand side is on the side and direction in which it flows. So the left bank is actually, as we look at the map, the right-hand side of the river. That's how it works. Ukrainian forces now have fire control over key logistics routes in Oleshki and the Kimburn Spit. Sometimes Kimburn Spit is thought of as this whole area. This is actually the Kimburn Peninsula. That is a Kimburn Spit up there, although people often call the whole thing the Kimburn Spit incorrectly. I don't know whether they mean just the Spit here or fire control over the whole of Kimburn Peninsula. But anyway, drones and long-range strikes have made Russian resupply nearly impossible, calling it extremely difficult. So that's good news for the Ukrainians there. And we hear from Euromaidan Press with reference to the Institute for the Study of War. Russian troops are pushing from the north to encircle Pokrovsk. As we can see, the neck of that cauldron is very close to being closed. But Ukrainian forces are holding central areas and hitting Russian positions with precision drone strikes. They are using as well FP2 drones, like we have seen over the previous 2 days. In my hits and losses, I've shown you video footage of those medium-range drones being used on the front lines, and I think that is really important use for those drones. I think they definitely need to be supporting their troops as much as possible. The ISW says Russia's pace is slow and the rest of Donetsk Oblast won't fall easily. Now, it's worth noting that I've talked about the importance of fighting in and around Pokrovsk and not allowing the Russians just to take it, because you've got to fight somewhere. If you're not fighting there, then you're fighting somewhere else just behind. So you got to pick and choose your place to fight. People are talking about how this then losing Pokrovsk might then lead to Kramatorsk and Sloviansk being taken. And it's worth noting, go and listen to Jimmy Rushton, the security analyst from Kyiv, or he's based in Kyiv at the moment, a British guy, on Times Radio. We talked quite a lot about this, saying that actually the Russians would have a really, really difficult time taking Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. These are big cities with loads of big places like the Avostal steel plant in Mariupol, where the Ukrainians were underground for ages because it was this steel plant that had these bunkers, an underground system in the event of a nuclear war. That's the same with Kramatorsk and Sloviansk. Loads of these Soviet-era factories and whatnot are all around those areas. So they are key areas, but like with Pokrovsk's utility has been lost, and Jimmy Rushton said this as well. You have lots of people saying, "Oh, what are you talking about? That Pokrovsk is useless now." Like, that's not what you used to say. No, it didn't used to say that, but it's been useless in terms of its intrinsic value for ages, because the use of this was in logistics, feeding different areas, roads going through it. Well, those roads, that's not been the case for 6 months now. The coke plants shut down some time ago. Its industrial utility has already been lost. Like, now Pokrovsk has no value other than it's a difficult place to fully take, and it's a good place for Ukraine, arguably, to continue trying to defend. Honestly, this is so important. So the Russians will claim that it's this hugely important place. It isn't anymore, but it's become a symbolic location, a bit like Bakhmut. Bakhmut lost its utility as soon as you're fighting on the outskirts of Bakhmut. It is no longer a useful industrial place, a useful logistics place. You can't drive vehicles through Bakhmut, while it was being attacked. So, those arguments were over and done with months and months and months ago. So anyway, I think that's really worth hammering home. But they've got to fight somewhere, and I would suggest fighting there. Now, the idea that Ukraine is going to give the rest of Donbass away to Russia, I just think is ridiculous. But what Russia does is they take these places, they scare quotes, liberate them. And Jimmy Russian again made a really good point of this, which is like, but Russia are lacking in money, and see how they've struggled to get Mariupol back up and running. If these places like Pokrovsk get destroyed, and Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, if Russia does end up with them in their possession, then you won't see these places be functional till long after Putin has died. Like, Putin is not going to be heralding the victory here in terms of taking Sloviansk and Kramatorsk and Pokrovsk and Bakhmut, because those places will need a massive amount of infrastructural investment, and they just won't be functional in a way that Putin would want for a decade. I don't know, just an awful long time. Nonetheless, it is evidently very difficult there. The Russians are, by all accounts, attacking Myrnograd from the north. They are just coming in to the outskirts of the city itself, attacking from the north, as well as obviously from the south. So, things are difficult. Obviously, Halai. There are claims from people like NK Mapping and other kind of overtly pro-Russian sources that Pokrovsk has fallen, that Kupiansk has fallen. Neither of those things are true, but it doesn't stop particularly Pokrovsk from being very, very difficult for the Ukrainians. There's some imagery coming out here. Here is a video of some Ukrainian equipment losses around Pokrovsk. This is completely to be expected. We know they use, first of all, combat asset pieces, material, much more than the Russians do, because I think they just have more of it. Weirdly now, the Ukraine, not weirdly, but as a result of the massive rates of attrition over the course of this war, the Russians have very few, I think, combat assets compared to what they would at the beginning of the war. And in fact, they didn't really use mobility vehicles. They've relied much more on infantry fighting vehicles like the BMPs and the old MTLBs to get their troops around, and they have been massively attrited. Russian units advancing on the ground near Pokrovsk are coming across piles of destroyed vehicles, says this probably, Heyman, I think, is a pro-Russian source. But there are certainly a number here, and I expect that, there are two here rather than piles, but I expect there will be quite a lot of Ukrainian vehicles, maybe more than two in the background there. There will be an awful lot of these kind of mobility vehicles right around Pokrovsk over the course of the there's three actually there. Over the course of the battles that have been taking place in this sector, the Ukrainians have lost an awful lot of these types of vehicles, but then, as I say, they use them more. Now, Deputy Commander Maxim Zhorin warns that while everyone is busy dissecting the Geneva talks, the front is deteriorating fast. So this is a negative view of the front line from a Ukrainian himself. He says that Russia's recent gains are the most rapid he's seen in a long time, and without urgent action, some areas could reach critical condition. And I guess, to be honest, that might be a decision that has been made, that you can try and defend everywhere as much as possible, but at some point it's wiser to make withdrawals to get to a position that is easier, better to defend. Now, this is I think the situation is most critical around Halai and in the south, and the Russians there, as they did in Pokrovsk as well, took advantage of the fog. In fact, I think someone says here the fog has been particularly brutal. Lots of Russian movement without much there's not much most drones can do about it. Breakthroughs of infiltration groups along the lines, and possibly a much larger one at Helipole. I guess we're hoping for heavy rains to turn the fields to mud and slow things down. The weather has not been on Ukraine's side because they rely so heavily on drone defense. They've got this drone corridor, which is, you know, a way of saving troops from being committed to the front lines, from dying, from being attrited. But of course, you know, if you can't use your drones for one reason or another, then that whole theory falls down. And total reliance on that means that you know, if there's a weakness in that defense, then, well, the Russians can take full advantage of it. So I think that's what has happened there. Now we have some cool first-person footage here of a MiG-29 jet. Sometimes good to remind ourselves of what is involved in these sorties. This looks like it came from late summer, to be perfectly honest. When you look at the fields, they are either just harvested, plowed, you've got foliage on the trees, or you know, some might have been sown now, I don't know. But there are, it depends what the crops are. So anyway, that looks a few months old, but pretty incredible. Flying very low, of course, to evade radar detection using the curvature of the earth there. So anyone who's there is a flat earther in my threads. I don't know if he's still watching, but he's often, whenever I say this, comes back with some kind of flat earth nonsense. But yeah, you can't. Radars don't make sense. You know, radar technology really, it does depend on the Earth being indeed spherical. So the reason they're flying low is because a radar will go in a straight line, and if it sits below the curvature of the Earth at something like this, radar is here, it goes off in that direction, and you can fly underneath it. It won't follow the curvature of the Earth; it goes in a straight line, and so you just fly under the radar there. So anyway, pretty impressive bit of footage there. Right, now we're going to move on to the big section of this video. Okay, first of all, Russians sent an absolute ton of stuff into Ukraine last night, 486 missiles and drones. So 464 drones, of which 438 were intercepted. That's a very good interception rate, really. And that usually happens when you have these massive attacks. The massive attacks seem to go much more explicitly for Kyiv, right? And as such, they're going for the place that is the best defended, and therefore the Ukrainians had the biggest chance of shooting stuff down. So the Russians trying to make a statement last night. Odessa was on the agenda, as well as Kyiv and a couple of other places, but not so much. Less so. Interesting that you got a bit of Sloviansk, Kramatorsk maybe down here, but then some places just a little bit further back from the front line. I wonder what they were aiming for then. Some smaller targets in and around this whole eastern region. Odessa there, and I don't know whether that is Ishmael and Reni down on the No, I don't know. That would be down here. So it's somewhere near. It might be Chornomorsk or something. Anyway, Odessa area, but mainly Kyiv and surrounding regions there. But the interception rates were pretty good because I think it was mainly aimed at that region. 4 Kinzhals were sent, aeroballistic missiles that are released by those jets. I've said previously that those ballistics are a bit different from the normal up and down, you know, the parabolic trajectory. Actually, I was corrected by Thierry, who said when they're released by the planes that get them up to speed, then they actually go into the normal parabolic trajectory. So they are typical ballistic missiles. 5 out of 7 Iskander cruise missiles, Iskander K cruise missiles were taken out. Good interception rate there. 5 out of 8 caliber cruise missiles. They were sent from the Novorossiysk region, actually, which itself was targeted. And then 3 out of 3 Iskander M ballistic missiles. So that's good news. 100% of the Iskander M ballistic missiles. So of all 7 ballistics, 4 were intercepted, which is not too shabby. That's a massive attack last night. We don't have huge amounts of knowledge as to what was struck other than residential buildings. And it's like I've said to you time and time again, if the Russians end up striking more residential buildings with their stuff, then that's horrific. But as from a military point of view only, that's actually better news. So when you don't see any footage, then it generally means that, in my opinion, it's speculation, but it probably means that the Russians have actually hit either straight up military targets or military industrial complex targets that are sensitive. So there's OPSEC, and you don't hear or see any footage coming from, say, Khmelnytsky's Starokonstantinov airbase and stuff like that. So when there's lots of footage of residential buildings getting hit, then that gives you hope. I mean, it's horrific from a human point of view, because you're likely to get human casualties, but you're not as likely to get, strategic military targets getting hit. So, it's horrible. War is horrible, and it depends how you're looking at these things. We also hear that Russian drones flew into the airspace of both Moldova and Romania. 2 German Eurofighter Typhoon jets took off, and 2 F-16s as well. But I don't think they shot anything down. There is this image that's come out from Moldova this morning. Police are investigating a Russian drone that has landed very neatly on the roof of someone's house or shed or something. Goodness me, I wouldn't be wanting to handle that to get it off, but I also wouldn't be wanting to for it to stay there. Storm comes along, branch hits it, that thing explodes, you've got no house. So yeah, you would want that to be removed with care. And I've said to you before, if there was anything I could do, it would probably be sitting, because I spend my life sitting. So if I was to help out the Ukrainian armed forces, it would be controlling a minigun in the side of a helicopter, shooting down Shaheeds. I like the sound of that. Anyway, there is someone with his face covered there, but someone operating one of these miniguns. That looks pretty cool from a kind of little boy's point of view. Right, boys with guns and all that. So Zelensky's confirmed Russia launched 22 missiles and over 460 drones in the latest wave of attacks targeting Dnipropetrovsk, Oblast, Kharkiv, the Chernihiv and Cherkasy regions, focusing on energy and civilian infrastructure. 4 drones even crossed into Moldova and Romania. So we hear 4 drones actually. So footage coming out earlier today, the number of injured from a Russian missile attack on Kyiv has risen to 14. According to Mayor Klitschko, 8 people, including a child, have been hospitalized. 4 people, I believe it's now 6 people, have been killed. But the 4 people in Svyatovsky district, where a strike hit a warehouse, rescue operations continue there. I don't know what warehouse that was, whether it's just purely industrial or commercial or whether it had anything to do with the military industrial complex, but unfortunately it appears that there were casualties and indeed deaths. Russian strikes damaged a railway station in Darnitsia in Kyiv region during the overnight attack. The extent of the damage is still being assessed, but it's part of a broader assault that hit civilian infrastructure across the capital. But hopefully these sorts of well, it's a little bit harder with rolling stock and locomotives, but with stuff like rail tracks, they can be fairly quickly replaced. Last night's Russian attack damaged residential buildings in Kyiv, killing 6 people and injuring 12 more. It says here, Anton Gerashenko says, during the Russian attack this morning, more buildings damaged. There might be people under the debris, according to the Kyiv mayor. So some people having a heck of a night. Unfortunately, not unusual these days. And here we can see a video of one of the apartment blocks that was hit in Kyiv that was set on fire during Russia's attack. Floors 4 to 7 of the building in Pokrovsk burn. A really significant destruction done to that residential building. You're never quite sure whether it was sent off course by interceptions, electronic warfare, or air defense, but it's same diff, isn't it? At the end of the day, Russia brought this on Ukraine. This is Russia's fault 100%. As you can see, damage to a building the next day is very, very evident there. Tim White says this morning city authorities have confirmed 6 deaths, another 14 have been injured, 8 of whom are in hospital. Here, one of the housing complexes in the city was hit in the attack, as you can see there. And then in Odessa was hit pretty significantly as well. A preliminary report says Gerashenko residential building was hit. Ukraine wants peace, but it's Russia that wants to continue the war and terrorize Ukrainian civilians. Now, it seems very clear to me that Russia is hitting civilian infrastructure far more often, frequently than the Ukrainians are. The Ukrainians are generally speaking, aim for infrastructure that is not right in the middle of the cities. And it seems far more frequent to me that the Russians hit their own residential buildings with their own air defense missiles. That happens more frequently than the Ukrainians hit them with intercepted or inaccurate missiles and drones. So, I mean, it does happen, but there is a massive scale difference between the two nations there in striking civilian infrastructure. Now, Russians attacked rescuers in Sumy as if to hammer this point home. Rescuers noted that the strike was aimed at a fire truck, a piece of equipment that is impossible not to recognize. A direct hit destroyed the vehicle. All personnel managed to take cover and were not injured, luckily. But my goodness me, you know, this is a case of, I mean, look at that, using firefighting equipment on a firefighting truck is not acceptable. But that is the Russians for you, deliberately targeting emergency services. Not acceptable. Russia's missile strike. Then there was a missile strike yesterday. This was not overnight. This was yesterday. I can't remember what time. Probably sometime in the early afternoon, possibly on Monday. Russia's missile strike on a packed civilian bus in Sumy is just one of 178,391 war crimes cases that Ukraine is investigating. Yet the Trump-Putin peace blueprint risks giving Moscow impunity without justice for victims. Very well said there, Euromaidan Press. And then we have this came out from, this wasn't last night, but the night before, when Kyiv was targeted. Russia fired 162 drones the previous night. 7 civilians died across Ukraine from those strikes. The attack targeted power infrastructure in 4 regions. Quote, she said, "It's getting lower," then screamed, and the call cut off. A woman was killed in Kharkiv while talking to her son on a mobile phone and was speaking to him, telling him it's getting lower, the drone is getting lower, or the missile is getting lower, and then bang, she dies on the phone to her son. Horrific. We are going to now go to what Ukraine achieved overnight, and it started fairly early. We had Moscow. Well, Moscow region was affected right throughout the day because there were balloons that were sent into Russia that closed down 3 Moscow airports. And then a bit later on, air defense systems were active in the Moscow region, and we could see that from missiles going up. And so I don't know what Ukraine achieved, what they were aiming for, what even weapons they were using there. But then later on, going into the evening time, panic started spreading on Russian monitoring channels as reports claimed a massive drone wave, up to 150 drones, was heading towards occupied Crimea from the sea, launched from the direction of Odessa. Alerts were being issued for Sevastopol and surrounding areas, fearing a coordinated swarm attack. But actually, it appears that much of what was sent bypassed Crimea. There were strikes on Crimea. Feodosia was hit, for example, and these light blue ones, by the way, I think are jet-powered drones, sort of hybrid drone missiles. But most of the drones appeared to bypass Crimea and go for Novorossiysk, Tuapse, possibly areas of Krasnodar. We had Taganrog being very much targeted, and we'll come to that in a sec. But although some of these arrows seem to be bypassing Taganrog and going deeper into Rostov there, but I'm not sure about that. And then one's coming across the Sea of Azov towards sort of Kerch and whatnot. So a whole range of activity taking place. Before we get to look at some of the finer details, I want to remind you of what took place in terms of the air defenses. I did a video last night, which was what air defense doing, and it was I've got another video to add to the repertoire. The air defense seemed to be going nuts, and I wouldn't like to be living in some of these areas near where Russian air defenses are operating, because they appear to have absolutely no consideration for people who are living there.
Yes.
Now, I don't know if that means they really did hit that or they're trying to hit something and it came down anyway, but they seem to be happy. That's near Sevastopol. So we do know that the Russians were using their air defenses near the municipal city on the Crimean Peninsula. Then we have another video here that's worth looking at. So here we go on this one. We have an air defense missile hitting right next to someone filming here.
О, полетело. Я ебу. Ну, давай. Въеби. Ох, нихуя себе. Ебать.
It's really close to them. Who would want to live near air defense systems? And then we have Gelendzhik, a Russian air defense missile going awry here as well. This one doesn't have sound. And bang, that hits really close. There's an incredible still from this of the air defense missile just slamming into there. You can see it. There's a still that I used for my thumbnail last night of that. Bang, that happened just in front of the person taking that video. Pretty incredible. And then from the same place, this is anti-aircraft air defense hitting a building in that same settlement. Now, that's claimed to be air defense. I did hear a bit of a kind of a moped sound there, so it might have been a drone. I don't know. An anti-aircraft missile fired by the Russian Pantsir S-1 air defense system hits the top floor of a residential building in Gelendzhik instead of a Ukrainian kamikaze drone. So it could well be that the sound of the engine is a drone it's trying to hit. Actually, yeah, it's not the drone. That drone engine is still going when that hits. So that does seem to me like it is an air defense missile hitting again. And then we have Biat Boy Slim having a disco on Brighton Beach here, as someone has said. So that air defense missile just goes up and comes down, doesn't do anything, probably lands on someone over there. Then you've got like 360-degree fire randomly. I mean, it's going into buildings. Like, look over here. Oh, I don't know. It seems to me utter chaos in terms of air defense. You know, the what air defense doing meme is strong here. And then we have another video to consider. Another air defense missile hitting it's Russian commercial infrastructure. I don't know, civilian infrastructure. Just an absolute shocker for the Russians. My goodness me. Right. Okay. Now we're going to go back to where we were in terms of seeing what was actually hit by the Ukrainians. The AFU using BARS jets, jet drones and Neptune cruise missiles successfully struck several strategic objects, says the General Staff. So there is the idea that they were using a whole range of weapons, and that's probably why you've got the light blue arrows there. Those would be for the BARS hybrid drone missiles, but then Neptune missiles were used as well, is the claim. We'll look actually at an updated one, including a video here that has some of these FP2, I think, bits of drone footage. Could be FP1, I don't know. A video from Magyar Robert Brovdi. He's kind of spliced together a load of the videos that actually you've already seen or will see going forward. This is a plane we're going to talk about in a sec. He says A-50. Not 100% sure. We'll come to that. So aircraft repair plant has been hit. The Tant K, named after the Beriev, so that's in Taganrog, with long-range radar reconnaissance aircraft A-50. Aircraft A-50 or an experimental A-60 at the time of the incident. At least 3 units of the A-50 and 1 unit of the 295 MS were under repair at the specified location. So it could be that hitting that that aviation repair plant has damaged or destroyed a whole host of stuff. But I guess we'll have to wait and see. There's certainly one big plane is definitely not going to be taking off in the near future, as we have that caught on camera, a double tap strike on that one. Okay, the Atlant Aero plant in Taganrog, manufacturer of the Molniya strike and reconnaissance drones and electronic warfare equipment, so that's a significant target. Tuapse oil refinery, the only refinery on the Black Sea coast with a processing capacity of up to 12 million tons of oil per year. The Sheshkaris oil terminal, it's been hit before, it's hit recently in Novorossiysk, a capacity of 39.9 million tons of oil per year. Oil standards for loading and unloading oil to tankers and an S-400 air defense missile system launcher were also attacked as well. So really significant strikes potentially overnight for the Ukrainians. Feodosia had some explosions. That's on the Crimean Peninsula, sort of the southeastern coastline there. Air defense was using large caliber weapons. We hear that Tuapse was, as mentioned, struck. That was oil infrastructure there being taken out by the Ukrainians. Good news for them. And then Novorossiysk, as we heard, was targeted. Lots of videos and sounds coming from there. And we do actually have news that a large Russian landing ship and an oil terminal were hit there. RBC Ukraine sources reported a large Project 1171 landing ship, which was located near the berth of the naval base, was also damaged. And then Russian air defense. Here's another Russian air defense, by the looks of it, I think slamming into their own infrastructure. So they've had a really, really crazy night. So yeah, the claim here, Ukraine Special Forces struck Novorossiysk port, hitting an oil terminal, S-300 or S-400 position, and a Project 1171 landing ship, which looks, this is for illustrative purposes, but looks like that. It's the tapir or alligator that was damaged, according to Babel, a large landing ship. Ships of this project are designed to land Marines on an unequipped coast and transfer troops and cargo by sea. Then we have this footage from Taganrog. In fact, we're going to see quite a lot from Taganrog now. This is reportedly a hit from a Neptune missile on a factory in Taganrog, Russia, used for aircraft production or repair there. In fact, here we have the aircraft plant being hit at the time. There's already a fire going off there, and then another strike over on that left-hand side. Here we have the fire taking place. You can see between.
Там пиздец. Полыхает так.
That's a significant fire by the looks of it in Taganrog. And then we have this. So this is okay. The one of the most interesting bits of footage we have coming out from Taganrog. If you look at that here, you have that there on the left is the tail of a large plane, possibly an A-60, possibly an A-50.
Да, самолет въебали.
Double tap.
Ебать!
So that plane was double tapped there. Someone has done a still and zoomed in on it, and that's what it looks like. And you can very clearly see the tail. Now, the question is whether there's a radar there or whether this is an A-60 without a radar and an A-50 was subsequently hit. We understand that there were some A-50s being repaired. There's a 295 MS there, and this A-60, or potentially this is the A-60. In fact, that's what it potentially is. I guess maybe in situ. The A-60 was preliminarily destroyed in Taganrog, says Max 25. So this is a bit of a weird plane, and I don't know if it's like super valuable to hit this, because I don't know if they particularly use them. In Taganrog, Ukraine may have hit one of only 2 A-60 planes in Russia's air fleet. It's a Soviet-age airborne laser system based on the Il-76MD military transporter. They were built in the 1980s, the second model having improved gear. The hit's been geolocated, but it's whether, I don't know if that's something they particularly use. Here we have Euromaidan press reporting Ukraine hit an A-60 laser aircraft in Taganrog along with a Tu-95 MS bomber upgrade hangar. Footage shows fires at the airfield and the facility. I'd love to know what the battle damage assessment of that is. For the A-60, here it is. What is it? So the first prototype designated 1A had its maiden flight in August 1981. The test flights with a 1 megawatt laser installation commenced in 1984. Some Russian sources claim that several dozen test flights were conducted. During these tests, the laser was fired at a stratospheric balloon type of targets at altitudes of 30 to 40 kilometers and LA-17 target drones. However, the first prototype met a dramatic end when it burned down at the Chavlovsky airfield in 1989 under unspecified circumstances. The experimental A-60 was quickly restored and renamed 1A2, with test flights resuming in 91. These tests were halted again in 93, only to be resumed in 2009. Notably, even Russian data indicate that only one copy of the A-60 was ever produced. Interestingly, by the late 2000s, Russia officially claimed that the A-60's flights were for peaceful purposes, ostensibly for laser tracking of spacecraft in the upper atmosphere. This did not stop Russian propagandists from asserting that the A-60 had military applications and was another one-of-a-kind weapon for confronting the USA. And then so on and so forth. So the point is, I'm not sure how valuable a target this was and how much it is a plane that is used at all. Nonetheless, you know, it's good PR at the very least for Ukraine to take out that plane. And if it's an A-50 AWACS, then that's even more significant. Now, so Taganrog, we had the attack on the Beriev aircraft plant. The Beriev plant in Taganrog, known as the GM Beriev Aircraft Company, specializes in the development and production of amphibious aircraft and special purpose aircraft, of which, you know, the A-60 is one, right? And that was certainly burning pretty successfully last night by the looks of it. So good news there. And yeah, preliminary analysis suggests the fire may be burning aviation fuel at the airfield in Taganrog. No official confirmation yet, but various images coming out from Taganrog of some fairly wide scale fires there. So hopefully some decent destruction to their capabilities. During today's attack at the Beriev Scientific and Technical Center and the A-60, a maintenance hangar was hit. This hangar is also used for servicing and upgrading Tu-95 MS aircraft to the Tu-95 MSM version that can carry more KH-101 missiles. So, you know, you want to stop these aircraft, well, taking off at all by destroying them. And here's stopping an upgrade to a variant that can carry even more cruise missiles that will eventually rain down on Ukraine. So that's a really useful strike there. Firms data confirms two separate fires in Taganrog after yesterday's Ukrainian drone and missile attacks, one at the Beriev Aircraft Company and one likely at an industrial enterprise nearby. You can see it there. Actually, the southern one is the airfield, and the other one is the Natek Yuzhmost industrial enterprise that I assume will have something to do with aviation industry. So then I'm sure more data will emerge throughout the day. A group of Ukrainian drones, this is from the night before, targeted the Brom plant in Krasno-Pokrovsk. This was that chemical plant, damaging production halls, with one of them taking heavy damage. More drones hit the Glebovskoye underground gas storage facility of Vnukovo, destroying its compressor building, and another strike reached the Simferopol oil depot. So again, subsequent nights, there must be some cumulative effect on Russia. They're just getting hit like Ukraine has been hit night after night after night. And indeed, we hear that there are possibly more missiles incoming right now. Mezhvodnoye, Chernomorskoye, and further on Donuslav. Alarm for the Neptune anti-ship missiles systems and Storm Shadows still flying. That's what the Russians are saying. So there could be more to report from the from Russian occupied territory or Russia itself. Just trying to see if there is anything else on the socials. Yeah, just talk about that Robert Brovdy A50s, A60, 295 MS present. So we'll wait to look at satellite images. Damaged oil loaders, S400. So the same stuff being talked about, but it looks like it was a significant set of strikes last night for the Ukrainians on Russia. Right, now we'll come to the final segment here where we're going to start talking about Russia's industry, Russia's oil reserves, and this is a Reuters piece that was really significant, released last night. Russia's oil revenues in November were expected to fall by 35% year on year, according to Reuters. Estimated income is 520 billion rubles, $6.6 billion, down from last year and 7.4% less than in October. So for the first 11 months of 2025, revenues are down 22%, well below the finance ministry's forecast. That is going to be hurting Russia's ability to prosecute this war, which is probably why they are selling off gold. Doom is coming for Russia, says the analyst. I guess hopefully JP Morgan analysts predict Brent crude oil will fall to $50 in 2026 and then $30 in 2027. Russia will be facing a disaster at those prices. So at those prices, Russia will be making a massive loss on their oil that trends lower than Brent quite considerably, especially at the moment as they're putting massive discounts on it to overcome people not wanting to buy it due to sanctions. Now, Anton Gerashenko has a thread on Russia's economy, saying it's turned into a militarized two-speed system in which the military-industrial complex and war rents prop up growth by draining resources from the private sector and normal civilian industries. Russian economy and the Russian regions are kept afloat by the war and state procurement, while the civilian sector and most regions are slipping into stagnation. Rising incomes and employment are essentially a bubble inflated by federal spending and a labor shortage, and by 2026, regional budgets risk falling into the red, meaning that ending the war without deep restructuring will almost certainly trigger a new severe economic collapse. The reforms and structural changes need to escape this trap are politically out of reach for the Kremlin. As a result, the regime's goal is not to prevent a crisis, but to avert a collapse. They want to prolong the neither war nor peace mode within the country for as long as possible while maintaining high military spending. They want to intensify manual redistribution of resources in favor of the defense sector and loyal regions. They want to mask the deterioration in living standards with statistics and propaganda, and they want to rely on grey export schemes and partial sanction relief without changing course. It reminds me of the US at the moment. So the Trump administration wants to hide their own stats at the moment. They've now decided not to release the GDP stats. They haven't released labor stats. What other one was it? Was it inflation stats and GDP stats? I'm not sure about inflation. There are three stats they have now refused to release. And you're like, sounds like Russia. Anyway, in this context, Moscow's interest in peace negotiations is not an attempt to end the war, but an effort to secure a favorable pause, to freeze the front and its territorial seizures, extract partial sanctions relief, and buy time to stretch out the inevitable crisis into a long-managed stagnation of the wartime economy. So that's how Anton Gerashenko sees it playing out. Now, Poland has charged another Ukrainian over the suspected Russian-backed railway sabotage. So although these are Ukrainians that are responsible, that's how Russia does it. Get some pro-Russian Ukrainians from the east, invariably, get them to go around Europe doing their dirty work. And then you get this kind of sense of confusion and cognitive dissonance for allied nations to Ukraine, as Ukrainians appear to be blowing up stuff. But it is done on the behest of the FSB, on the behest of the Kremlin and the Russians. Vladimir B., this Ukrainian, was charged with assisting the Warsaw called an, quote, unprecedented act of sabotage allegedly orchestrated by Russian intelligence. What else do we have in the latest letter? Igor Girkin. So this is Igor Girkin, who's in prison for not being nice enough about the Russian military efforts. He was, as an ultra-nationalist and as a little green man leader in the 2014 iteration of this war, he has been, as a mill blogger, so critical of Russia that he was put in prison, but actually he's critical of them not doing a good enough job of killing Ukrainians. Anyway, he continues to be able to write stuff in prison and getting it out on the socials. Everything he says is critical of Putin and the Russian war effort. So this is what Strelkov has said. He's a Russian war criminal and ultra-nationalist critic of the Kremlin. He shows that even the radical war supporters see Russia's decline. He says limited Russian gains and Trump's points create a false hope of peace, which won't happen. So what do we have? He says, we have military success, although quite limited, that have overlapped with Trump's points and again created some illusion of a quick deal, although there is no sign of it not only now, but also in the medium to long term at all. I can note that the expectation of a quick peace has even penetrated into our ranks of the condemned, although it is perceived skeptically by almost everyone who is really capable of thinking. In this regard, the next disappointment lowers the already low motivation of society to steadfastly endure the hardships and deprivations of the special military operation. And these pessimistic moods will only grow, and the remnants of trust in the authorities, already very insignificant, will quickly evaporate. This will, of course, be facilitated by not only by growing economic and accordingly social problems, but also by increasing strikes by drones and missiles from former respected partners, which our media stubbornly and foolishly conceal in more than 90% of the cases, giving ample ground for the same growth of distrust in the authorities and the rejection of any official state propaganda by the masses. And this is, in the conditions of a civil, in essence, war, is the most dangerous. Interesting omission that 90% of the strikes inside Russia are not reported by the Russians. And I've talked about this before, like just not knowing how successful the Ukrainians have been in their strikes, because it's really difficult to get information out of Russia. Anyway, even now the authorities are perceived even by simple politically unversed people very skeptically, and tomorrow, as has already happened in the most tragic moments in our history, skepticism will be replaced by rejection, which the enemies, not Putin, the enemies of Russia and the Russian people will certainly try to exploit. There is still time to change the situation, but for changes in a positive direction, super efforts are already necessary, which do not fit with the hardened framework of semi-wartime and are absolutely impossible without radical personnel changes in the leadership of the special military operation, industry, the ideological sphere, and very importantly, foreign policy initiatives. If nothing changes, a catastrophe awaits us, and such a catastrophe that our state in a former historical form may not survive. That is Evil Gherkin's opinions on what is happening, and I'd sit up and take notice. Now, Emmanuel Macron, just a couple of things on the peace negotiations that have been taking place between Europe, Ukraine, and the US. I did a video on this earlier, but a couple of things have come out since. This is Emmanuel Macron, the French president, saying that after a peace deal is signed, quote, assurance forces will be deployed beyond the front line, including in Kyiv and Odesa. Nearly 20 countries, among them the UK, France, and Turkey, are ready. These won't be NATO forces, but a multilateral coalition acting like NATO's eastern flank. Now, this is really good news because this goes directly against what the Putin-esque, the Kirill Dmitriev 28-point peace plan stipulated, that there will be no foreign forces in Ukraine. Macron's come out and said, yes, I will. And there's going to be 20 countries involved, including us, UK and Turkey. So get used to it. I love it. Brilliant. Zelensky said this morning, I spoke with Prime Minister Starmer following the meetings in Geneva. We see many prospects that can make the path to peace real. There are solid results and much work still lies ahead. Today, a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing will take place. So Britain taking the lead on the Coalition of the Willing, which is good news there. We have coordinated our positions and the priority issues for discussion, as well as some of our next steps and contacts. It was interesting. I was listening to Alistair Campbell the other day talking. He went to the G20 and said that Britain still is kind of among the leadership of the world, like speaking to people from other countries. Britain still does take the lead on stuff. So for those British people who feel that Britain is a failed state at the moment, if you just open up Twitter and you read about Britain, it's all like, it's the worst country on earth, we're all falling to pieces, oh my god, because 90% of the people posting that kind of crap are Russian or Nigerian or whatever it is, as we're finding out from the latest expose. The reality is that Britain still is turning up and is being counted, and so good stuff. Right, Alexander Stubb, the leader from Finland, Finnish president, is he? I had a phone call with Zelensky and Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, this morning. The future of Ukraine is for Ukraine to decide, and European security is for Europe to decide. The work between Ukraine and the US continues. The following days are decisive in our efforts to achieve a just and lasting peace. Well done, good stuff. I like to hear that kind of positivity. Last thing I'll just come to you, as this popped up earlier when I was surveying the socials. Russia can't build its oil capacity under sanctions, and delayed projects are slowing every part of its development pipeline. Output appears steady only because older fields are being pushed harder than before. When global demand strengthens again, markets will feel the tightening supply, says Euromaidan Press there. So something else to add in to the claims about the oil industry and whatnot. And no reports. The latest thing here is Moscow is reportedly doing everything it can to prevent presidential chief of staff Andriy Yermak from joining Zelensky on his trip to Washington. Russian sources are said to be furious over the outcome of the Geneva talks and are preparing a wave of disinformation aimed at undermining Ukraine's team. Fascinating. I think probably Ukraine are back in the game now. Thanks, and I kind of made this point in my video earlier this morning, thanks in large part to Europe. I think the European leaders have really stood up for Ukraine and have taken it back to the Americans, and I think the course has at least somewhat changed, or very substantially changed from where we were a couple of days ago. So that's really good news. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. But in the meantime, please remember to go on to atpgeo.com/donate. And if you do so, you will find our latest fundraiser, which we are doing together with Silicon Curtain for an ATV, an all-terrain vehicle, a nice big old quad there for the 80th Air Assault Brigade. It's just started this morning, so there's nothing on there yet. Please help us out by donating to this worthy cause. That's atpgeo.com/donate. Okay, thanks so much for watching. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Toodle pits.